Thank you, everybody, for certainly coming this morning. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to tell you a little bit about the story that I've gone through and that got me into this industry. But then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over some important points if you ever have to go through the senior care / senior living maze. Because as we all know, over the past 2 to 3 weeks, just with coming to these seminars, nobody wants to think about a topic like this. Right? Nobody wants to bring it up to family members. And unfortunately, people wind up in a crisis. So my story begins back in 2008. And I was 26 at the time, grew up here in the Metroplex. I had a job where I was in mergers and acquisitions. So I was on the road every week. And my younger brother, Max, was 21 at the time. He was at UT Austin. And my parents had been divorced for about 8 years. And so with my mom started kind of calling me a bit more, just asking me questions, right? And so you have to remember, I was on the road every week. I was working about 80 to 100 hours a week at that time. I was doing the SBC AT&T merger. And so with that being said, my mom would call me and say, well, Paul, do you know where my checkbook is? Paul, do you know why are the bills being late in payment? For example, do you know where my keys are? I really didn't think that much of it because my mom was 59 years old at that time. My mom's mom, my grandma, had passed away in 2007 at the age of 93. So my mom's side of the family had great genetics. But in the time that my grandma passed away, and then until 2008 in the fall, my mom had been in two minor car accidents. And subsequently, she had banged her head both times on the window. But also, at that time, again, my mom was getting confused with driving with the lines in the road. I really didn't think much of it because, again, I thought my mom's 59 years old. My mom's mom passed away a year ago. So I was like, not having had much experience, my dad had never gone through the senior care, senior living maze with his parents. His parents both had passed away relatively quickly in their home, so he never had to interview hospices and companion agencies and look for assisted livings. And so I just thought, oh, let's just get my mom into a brain rehab facility. Something's going on. She banged her head. She'll get some therapy. She'll be good to go. And so subsequently, what we had to do is we had to find a neurologist to kind of see what was going on. And so the neurologist had recommended getting an MRI, a CAT scan, and a PET scan. And again, not having any experience, but you know what, they'll come back, we'll look into a brain rehab facility. Well, unfortunately, the neurologist came back that my mom had been diagnosed with early onset of Alzheimer's disease at the age of 59. And of course, this was a complete shock. We were devastated. My mom was devastated. Growing up, my mom never worked. She was a housewife. She volunteered a lot. My mom had a lot of friends in the community. And so when we started going to my mom's friends, because a lot of my mom's friends over that past year would say things to us, but when we got the diagnosis, I expected my mom's friends to be there for us the most. And people who have gone through this, unfortunately, already know what I'm going to say, but my mom's friends really weren't there for us. They were too timid. They didn't really know how to approach my mom. My mom was still the same person, right, physically, but she might not remember something. She didn't have recognition issues of recognizing her friends or family. So subsequently, as we started telling people, my mom's friends who we thought were her friends were not there for us, unfortunately. And my mom, unfortunately, started getting depressed, which makes sense. My mom didn't really have a purpose. My mom started sleeping every day until noon. And so as a family, we decided that something needed to be done. Because again, given the circumstances, since I was out of town every week and my brother was out of town, so the neurologist had recommended either having somebody come in the home, like a companion to be with my mom, or to look at independent living with some assistance. And so, again, my dad never had gone through this. The neurologist group had given us a big book. It was like a 300-page book. It was kind of overwhelming. And as a family, we kind of sat down, and we thought that my mom really needed to be around people, but most importantly, stimulate the brain, because that's what the neurologist had recommended, is that you need to stimulate the brain, and you need to make sure that your mom is going to have physical exercise. So after kind of evaluating things, we decided that we needed to find a senior living community for my mom, even though she was going to be 25 years younger than the average person. So what did I do? Just like any consumer, I went online, right? Typed in senior living. Well, I found an internet company called A Place for Mom. Raise your hand if you've heard about A Place for Mom. All right, so don't reach out to them. That's my competition. Always gets a good laugh. I've done that joke probably 500 times. So basically, I reached out to them. I learned how their model worked. I was talking to somebody in San Antonio, and they blasted my information out. And I was like, it really wasn't adding value because I was getting phone calls from properties. Well, so myself, my dad, and my brother, we started out on this journey of going to independent living communities. And we first started looking at 55-plus apartments where they could provide additional services, and then we went and looked at independent living. Well, we looked at 4 properties, and we learned that some of the marketers, because that's who we were interacting with, some of the marketers are very honest, kind, and compassionate, but some were like used car salesmen where they were just concerned about us signing up by the end of the month. And so after touring 4 properties, and again, this is what the neurologist recommended, independent living with some assistance, we thought, is that going to be enough oversight for my mom? And so what we kind of analyzed is that we're the ones who know my mom the best, not the neurologist, right? The neurologist is the one that does the testing. And so what we decided to do is we decided to look at assisted living. And again, what I tell families is you can utilize the physician from a medical perspective, but you're the one who knows your family member the best. And so we went and looked at another 4 assisted living properties. So at the end of our search, we looked at 8 properties, which was a lot. Basically, we're analyzing property A versus property E, and we were in a time crunch, right? Because we knew that something needed to be done. And after our decision making, we decided that assisted living was going to be the better fit for my mom. So we went against the neurologist's order, because again, the neurologist only saw my mom 3 times. He doesn't know my mom that well. We're the ones who know my mom the most. We decided to move into assisted living for the following reasons. I knew that my mom would eat 3 meals a day. I knew that my mom would get her medications. If my mom was in independent living, I'd be relying on a third-party vendor. But also, my mom would now have a purpose because she'd get more socialization, but she could also have the opportunity to socialize and stimulate the brain. So as a family, we decided on an assisted living community for my mom. Well, that was only half the battle, because my mom didn't even have her legal documents. Again, we never thought anything would have to be done. We hear about these terms, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, disability. My mom wasn't working. What are we going to do? What are we going to do for an insurance, right? So we also had to do that. We had to talk with my mom's financial planner. How are we going to pay for all this, right? My mom's 59 years old. And so subsequently, my mom always loved fashion. She loved purses. She loved clothing. Well, going from a 3,500 square foot house into a 550 square foot apartment, there was a lot of arguments that had to be, a lot of arguments of getting rid of things and donating things to different charities. Then we had to figure out about the house. So basically with what I'm kind of saying is there was a lot that had to be done in a short amount of time. And we were in a crisis, essentially. Because again, I didn't trust my mom at home. I thought that my mom was going to kill herself. She was so depressed. So we decided to move my mom into an assisted living. And basically by going through this process, I thought that there needed to be a local, trustworthy company to help families out, really kind of navigate the senior living maze. Because again, I had utilized A Place for Mom. I learned how their model worked. And I thought that having that local person, that local group to be an advocate for the family would be helpful. because whether you're 26 like I was, 56 or 86, the average person doesn't know what to do, where to go, and who to trust. I'm not a car person. When I go to Firestone to get my tires checked, I already know I'm going to get taken advantage of, right? I don't know. Like, I'm hoping that they're going to tell the truth, right? But also, I equate this process of going through the senior care maze almost like looking for a daycare. And the average family that typically goes through this, it usually falls on the female. It usually falls on the daughter-in-law, the daughter, a niece, at a majority of the time. And a lot of families say that they want a pretty place. And so my job is to educate families that it's not about the looks. And so I'll tell you all at the end with what I do as a company, but that's a little bit about my story. With my mom's situation, she was in assisted living / memory care for about 5.5 years. So my mom had to move to assisted living, then to memory care. My mom was never an elopement risk. My mom was never a risk to wander. The reason why my mom had to move to memory care is that she needed more attention. And that's what it comes down to in this industry, are staffing ratios and response times. So my mom moved to memory care. My mom was living in memory care. She got up in the middle of the night and she fractured her tailbone. She would never walk again. My mom got admitted to the hospital, and I was hoping that my mom could qualify for rehab. And this was back in 2013. So I'd been helping families for about 5 years. And I found myself in a crisis. I'm like, what am I going to do? My mom can't qualify for rehab due to her cognitive abilities to be able to comprehend the therapy. So subsequently, what we did is we moved my mom to a residential care home or a group home. Raise your hand if you've heard of that term before. Okay, so good, everybody's heard of it. So I would tell you, in the 15 years I've been in this line of business, they're the most popular that they've ever been. And so a residential care home is a house in a neighborhood setting. It typically offers the best staffing ratios, the best response times, where everything can be heard. My mom lived in a care home for the last 2.5 years of her life. Hands down, that's where we got the best communication. Hands down, that's where we got the best oversight. Were they perfect? No. Is any place perfect? No. But I got the communication that we needed. My mom was in this care home for about 2.5 years. My mom was actually on hospice for 13 months. In hospice, nobody wants to hear the word hospice, but the benefits of hospice are significant. And I remember doing the admission with my mom with the hospice. My mom actually got better being on hospice. My mom actually got taken off of hospice care after she was on it for 7 months. And so again, nobody wants to hear the words hospice, but for a lot of families, there's a lot of benefits to it. Number one, Medicare pays for it. But number two, what I like is it's a second set of eyes, right? And the one thing I would tell you with a hospice provider, it's not the name of the hospice company. What it all comes down to with a hospice is the nurse that you're going to have who's going to be your eyes and ears. So there are a lot of benefits to hospice. It's not like maybe 10, 20 years ago where hospice meant that somebody had 24 to 48 hours to live. Yes, does that sometimes apply? Yes. But there are some families that we've had who have been on hospice for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. You do have to requalify for it. But I always just bring up hospice because a lot of people don't know about the benefits of it. Now, there are some disadvantages certainly to going on hospice care, just like with any situation. But with our family experience, we really had a good experience with hospice. So that's just a little bit kind of about my story. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through some things that if you ever have to go through the senior care maze or senior living maze, that you should maybe take into consideration. All right, so one thing is, what I tell families is that everybody's situation is so different. So if you're going through the senior care maze or senior living maze, it's smart for you to rely on your friends, your peers, and your coworkers. But what you have to remember is that my situation is different from David's situation or Kelly's situation, right? So just because David and Kelly might have had their loved ones in the same place, you have to remember that everybody's needs are so different. That's one thing to remember. But also, if I go post on Facebook and somebody says, well, hey, I had my loved one in this property 3 years ago. What you have to remember is that, again, things change in this industry. Unfortunately, this industry has a high turnover, and it is a challenging, it is an arduous process, certainly, of being a caregiver. And the thing is, what I tell families, what's most important is finding a location that has a good management team. The nice thing is, you all have a member of the church who's very well respected in this industry. I don't know if you guys know Kelly over here. Kelly's been he's wearing the brown jacket. He's been in the industry probably 30 years, plus years-ish. So he's very well respected as an administrator in the DFW area. So the reason why I bring him up is basically just like with any kind of organization, it starts from the top down, right? If you have a good leader, if you have a good administrator, a good executive director, it's going to funnel on down. The average person that tries to find a senior living location that does this by themselves, what they'll do is they'll only interact with the marketer, right? And a lot of these marketers, again, are going to tell you yes, yes, yes to get you in. So what I think is best is that you want to make sure that you have the opportunity to meet with the management team. And again, it all depends on the type of living that you're looking for. But again, going back to your situation is different. Just remember that my situation is different, certainly, from Kelly's situation, right? So my mom, for example, had major agitation. There are some memory care buildings or care homes that would not have accepted my mom. Very important. The other thing is that when you're going online, don't input your information on any websites, right? So the other thing is, make sure if you are calling a property, make sure you're actually talking to somebody who's actually at the property instead of a regional kind of marketer or a regional kind of director. It's very important that you're talking to somebody who's physically at that location. Now, the other thing is, I bring up the point of reviews online, right? People look at reviews. There are some places that do their own 5-star Google reviews, right? We know that. So try not to be influenced, again, by the reviews that you see online. But what's very important is that if a family calls up a property, the property is going to ideally want you to go and tour when it's not busy. They want you to go and tour at 2 o'clock. I don't want you touring at 2 o'clock. There's not as much going on, right? I want people going at a mealtime. Does anybody know the reason why? Say it again?
It's chaos.
Exactly. I want you going when it's chaotic, right? So it's ideal for you to try to go during lunch or dinner time. But also what I tell families is that you want to see what the food is like. But also the whole goal of trying to find a place, again, depending on your situation, is to try to find a lunchtime table group that your loved one has 2 to 3 people that they can relate well to. And people will say, well, should I bring my loved one? It all depends on the situation. It truly does, right? It really depends on the situation. But if you can meet 2 to 3 people that your loved one can relate well to, it'll make the transition a lot easier. Now, the other thing that I tell families is you always want to ask for a reference. Now, a place might give you a reference of somebody who lived there 3 years ago. That doesn't matter, right? I want you to get a reference of those 2 to 3 people that you had the opportunity to meet. And then what you're going to do is you're going to say, Kelly, can you give me a reference of one of those 3 people? Because that way, that reference will be able to be somebody that your loved one can perhaps relate well to. Now, this industry, as Kelly and David know, has been affected by the inflation over the past couple years, right? What it comes down to, senior living, it's food costs and it's labor costs, right? So one thing that I tell families is that don't be influenced if there's one room open, right? Don't be influenced that there's one room open. You need to make this decision when you are ready. If you don't get that room, it wasn't meant to be, right? Also, don't be influenced that the community will offer to give you a flat screen TV on the wall if you sign by the 31st. Again, this happens. I'm not joking. I mean, again, do not be influenced by that. The other thing that I tell families is, again, this process is like looking for a daycare. So I tell families you want to go with a tenured operation. So, for example, would I want one of my kids to go to a daycare that's brand new? No. Would you want your loved one to go to a place that's brand new? No. You ideally want to try to go with an operation that has at least been open for a year, is what we tell families. Because the most mistakes are going to be made within the first year, right? So the other thing that I tell families is, given that a lot of people that reach out to us are females, don't be influenced by the looks, right? It's not the looks that are the most important thing. Now, certainly you can customize, you can decorate the room. But what I always ask each family is, how important are the looks of the building, right? It could be the inside, the outside, but just remember, again, if somebody moves into a location, you can paint the walls. I always kind of joke around, if you're a Dallas Mavericks fan, you can paint the walls green and blue, right? The other thing is, again, by going through this, a lot of people have no idea that sometimes the rates can be negotiable. So when you are going through this process, don't be overzealous to say, oh yeah, my parent owns this $1 million home. Because again, sometimes the rates can be negotiable. One thing I tell families to ask is, you want to ask, what is the average yearly increase in the price of rent? So what has the price of rent been like, the increase been like the past 3 years? And not just an average, what was it in 2021? What was it in 2022? You always also want to ask, how does the property charge? Some properties are all-inclusive, right? Some properties charge a level of care cost. So you want to ask, how do the charges work? The other thing that you certainly want to think about asking, which is a very important thing, is how long is the rate good for? There are some properties where I've had families that have moved in September 1st where the rate has increased January 1st. Is that fair? No. You need to ask how long the rate is good for. Is it a year from when the lease is signed? But you need to ask, how long is that rate good for? You know, the financials are ultimately what I find the most important thing in anybody's search. It's financials, it's geography, is ultimately what it comes down to. And again, the average family does tend to unfortunately be in a crisis setting. Most people that contact us need to find a place within 30 days. And again, because it's a topic that a lot of people don't want to bring up. Now, in the 15 years that I've been in this industry, this is the busiest that we've ever been, but what I see is this is the busiest the communities have ever been. And the reason why is because the challenge of having in-home care come in somebody's home. The reason being is that a lot of these in-home caregiving companies are experiencing a lot of turnover because they can go to another company and get another dollar increase. Ultimately, the care staff, what I'm seeing, is the one who's in demand, right? They can go and keep getting increases. And so subsequently, our whole goal is for somebody to stay at home for as long as possible. but we just want to be their go-to resource if they ever need to find a location. If you are looking for in-home care, what I always recommend to families is that you have the opportunity to interview and get to know the companion that's going to come in the person's house. Not just meet with the marketer or the admissions person, right? You want to make sure that you do your due diligence. But again, one of the challenges is that families are running into caregivers not showing up on time, caregivers turning over. There's been 4 different caregivers in a month. That doesn't solve the challenge for a lot of people. But the thing is, though, the nice thing about being here in the Metroplex is that there are so many different types of resources. And so one alternative is, again, in-home care. If you have a loved one that has dementia, there are adult daycares for people that have cognitive impairment, which is a great resource. And it's a great way to have a respite. And the reason why I bring up the adult daycare, adult day stay programs is that ultimately, if somebody does have dementia, I personally feel like it's the caregiver that's most affected, unfortunately. Going through this disease of being a caregiver, statistics show that the caregiver is the one who's most affected from a stress perspective. And so the adult day stay is a good alternative for families to look into. The other nice thing about being here in the Metroplex is there are house call doctors. There are doctor groups that can come to your house or to an assisted living or to a long-term care or to a residential care home. I personally feel like once somebody hits the age of 70, they should switch from their internal medicine doctor. So my dad is in good health, but I've always heard my dad griping about his physicians. Oh, the communication. I had my dad switch to a geriatrician. And raise your hand if you've heard of the term of a geriatrician. Okay, good. So a decent amount of people. This is different than a concierge physician. A geriatrician is an internal medicine doctor that has a focus on seeing seniors. The benefit of a geriatrician is that it's their sole specialty, seeing seniors and dealing with senior type of issues. What I just find is I've had families that I've met with that have 6 doctors. And I met with a family last week, their mom was on 22 medications. I'm not a physician, but that's a lot of medications. And the challenge what I've seen is that a lot of these doctors, even if they're in the same location, right? Like, I'm not saying UT Southwestern, but I'm just saying, even if they're in that building, they don't talk to one another, right? And so subsequently, the less doctors that you can have, the better. Now, here's the challenge then. If you go to your loved one and saying, hey, it's better to switch to a geriatrician, they're going to come back to you and say, well, I've been going to my doctor for 30 years and I love him. But I'm just telling you, it's better to go to a geriatrician if at all possible. Geriatricians take Medicare. The challenge is there's not a lot of them out there, and you might have to wait a couple months initially. But going back to my dad has had the best experience with his geriatrician because of the bedside manner and the communication. So there's a lot of benefits to a geriatrician, but bringing up those house call doctors, if somebody is not able to leave their home, there are house call doctor groups that can come visit your loved one with where they're living, again, if you cannot go to the doctor. I just bring up this point because I remember there was a family I was helping and their mom had tripped on a rug going into a doctor's office and then broke a hip, right? So it's like if you can try to alleviate and make things more convenient. Now, my mom had a house calls group that would visit her. She wouldn't see the geriatrician every month. It'd be every 6 months. But we formed a good bond with the nurse practitioner. So again, I personally feel like it's very important that you have a good geriatrician and a good medical team is what I tell families. The other thing that I tell families is a lot of people will, again, go through this process where they only, again, meet the marketer. Again, depending on the type of living, right? So with independent living, a lot of people are moving to 55-plus apartments in independent living now because, of course, coming out of COVID, people are tired of maintaining their homes, right? For example, if there's a problem with the roof or the hot water heater breaks, I describe independent living a cruise ship, but on land. They're not going to force you to do the activities, but they have meals available. They have on-site maintenance. They have transportation. So independent living can be a great alternative for people. But the thing is, like, if you are moving into an independent living, again, get to know the administrator, right? Same thing with the assisted living and memory care. You can't predict what's going to happen with your situation, but you always do want to ask what kind of care can be handled and what type of care can't be handled. When might somebody have to move to a higher level of care? Now, a lot of these buildings are based on census. I don't care if it's a not-for-profit, faith-based community, or for-profit. And what a lot of people are surprised to hear is that a lot of the faith-based communities tend to be some of the more expensive properties here in the Metroplex. Don't base a property just because it's a not-for-profit or a faith-based community. Again, it comes down to getting to make sure that you know the right fit that is going to be best for your loved one. A lot of communities will approach families when they need to move to a higher level of care. But oftentimes, it's going to be you, the consumer, that is going to identify that. And I would tell you about 35% of the families that we're helping currently move to care homes, the houses in neighborhood settings. Because typically in most care homes that we're going to refer families to, there's going to be 2 caregivers to 8 residents. So it's a 1-to-4 staff to resident ratio. It's cheaper than a lot of the big buildings. They don't charge a level of care. It's all inclusive. But if David comes to me and says, well, my loved one is social, I can't refer David to a care home because there are advantages and disadvantages, of course, to every property. There could be an assisted living that might only have 40 residents, and if somebody is relocating from Boston, it might not be the right fit. That's why we get to understand everybody's exact needs and priorities. Now, again, a lot of people are having to do this move in a crisis, and that's what we want to that's what you want to avoid. What I tell families is, once you've come to a decision, a lot of people say, let's do the move on a Saturday, right? Not a good time to do a move. Do not do a move on a Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. What's most ideal is to try to set up the room or the apartment before somebody moves in. So you want to try to furnish it, you want to try to decorate it before somebody moves in. The best day of the week to do a move is a Monday. It's the start of the week, right? So you want to try to do a move on a Monday is what we tell families. Now again, every property is going to have a different personality to it. Every property is going to have a different kind of clientele and resident. But again, that's why I tell families it's about getting to know at least 2 to 3 residents that your loved one can relate well to. Now, a lot of people don't want to hear sometimes the honest truth, but the reason why people reach out to us is that we will be direct with families on what is the appropriate fit. And a lot of people say, well, Paul, how early should we go and tour a property? I don't think you should tour properties if you're a year out. Now, yes, if you're looking for independent living and if you want a 2-bedroom, you should. But if you're looking for a care kind of operation, if you're looking for an assisted living or a memory care or a long-term care, if you go and tour a year out, and if you've made a decision on a property, what happens if there's a change in that property? right? What happens if there's a change in the needs of your loved one, right? So let's just say that you're set on an assisted living property, but your loved one is a one-person transfer. That means it takes one person to get them up. Well, let's just say in a year from now you've done the due diligence, but then your loved one now is a two-person transfer and can't help with pivoting. Your homework's, it wasn't helpful because that property might not be the right fit anymore. And a lot of people are surprised to hear that most assisted livings can't take somebody who can't pivot. So people are certainly surprised. But also what we tell families is that you want to take into consideration the location of the apartment or the room that you select. So what a lot of people, what might happen, they might have one apartment open. Well, it's that apartment that's at the far end of the hallway. However, they're going to say, well, you know what? We see this other one coming available in 90 days. Why don't we move you for free? I don't recommend that because it's 2 moves, right? It's 2 moves on your loved one. That's a transition, right? And that's why I have families that might pay an extra couple of weeks for that prime location. It's worth it though, because again, doing a move, you are going to see a slight decline, right? You are going to see a slight decline because if you're coming out of your home, it's a different transition. So the other thing that I tell families is, as you are, again, going through this process, if you can, try to make sure that you go twice before making a decision. So for example, if I go and tour at Wednesday at lunchtime, go on the weekend as well, right? Maybe pop in on a Saturday. A lot of places do not like to do tours on Sundays. And the reason why is because they usually like one day of the week at the minimum to not have people coming in and touring and visiting. So again, try to do the homework and the due diligence. I can tell you again, like a lot of families that we've been helping recently, they come to us and they say, how do we know when it's time? How do you know when it's time to do a move? You could approach your physician and they could tell you from a medical perspective, but they're not the ones who are providing the care to their loved ones. So the most popular reason on why somebody has to do a move for a care situation, incontinence. That's the #1 reason, is incontinence. Secondly, caregiver burnout. If it is affecting my ability to sleep, to get a good night's sleep, if it is affecting my ability to function, right? But also third, if safety. I had a family call us yesterday. There's 5 kids in the picture, and there's a mom who's looking for her husband. She was always against doing something, against doing a move. However, her husband has now gotten belligerent and is having physical agitation. And she and her kids swore they would never do anything. But the kids approached their mom, and the mom was nervous for her safety. And so now they have to find a memory care that can handle the agitation that this gentleman has. And what you want to avoid is, if you are going through a loved one that has dementia, ideally you want to avoid ever going to a geriatric psych unit. So again, you want to try to do and find the reasons why the agitation might be occurring or what is setting things off. But for this situation, I told the family, we need to focus on a community that dedicates themselves just to memory care. Because what I find with the properties that can dedicate themselves to memory care is that they'll have a greater awareness on how to handle the agitation, is what we tell families. So those are some high-level points. I could probably talk for 4 or 5 more hours, honestly. The one thing I'm going to tell you is that in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, there's actually over 900 different alternatives out there. And people are like, how is that? 55-plus apartments, independent living, assisted living, memory care, acute rehabs, long-term care facilities, and residential care homes. So there's a lot out there. in the Metroplex. So again, you want to make sure that you have the opportunity to do the due diligence. What kind of questions do you all have that I can answer?
Could you talk about the kind of the model where you pay for your unit?
Sure.
You basically
The entrance fee? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean where it's substantial.
Sure.
Buyback.
Yep.
How has that worked for any of your clients who have used that?
Sure. All right, so the question is, there are communities that have an entrance fee. Has anybody heard about in the news with Edgemere over the past year or two? All right, so this has always been my opinion, is that number one, one of the biggest mistakes that people make is that they do not tour all areas of a community. So let's just say, for example, David was looking for a loved one that had dementia, but he was looking at the assisted living, but didn't look at the long-term care and memory care on site. David will only look at the assisted living, I can guarantee you, because he's focused on that area. Make sure that you tour the entire area of the community. So the reason why I'm telling you this is there are some continuing care retirement communities that might have 1,000 residents. There's one here that has 1,000 residents. They only have 28 assisted living apartments. They sell it to you that you can age in place. It's not true at all. When families find out, when then they have to move out, they're upset. A lot of these continuing care retirement communities sell it to families that you can age in place, which is true sometimes. But what happens if there's a CCRC where somebody has extreme behaviors, where they don't want to manage it? They might ask you to leave. And so the other thing is with a continuing care retirement community, I think it's beneficial for somebody who's in a financial position where they might run out of funds. Now, if David comes to me and he's like, well, my loved one has $5 million in assets or an amazing long-term care policy, you don't benefit from doing a continuing care retirement community from a financial perspective. What people don't know is that the entrance fee only applies to moving into independent living. So just going back to, let's just say, Presbyterian Village North, the entrance fee only applies to the independent living. People don't know if you move into their assisted living coming from the outside, you don't have to pay a large entrance fee. Now, the reason why a lot of these continuing care retirement communities across the country might have struggled is that they're investing that money. They're making money from your money. So my opinion is I've never been a fan of entrance fee properties, especially with the way that interest rates are right now. So I'd rather have that $300,000 entrance fee where my financial advisor or savings account is making 5% interest. The thing is, what people don't know is that you don't get that entrance fee back right when you move out. It depends on the property. There are some properties that can hold it for up to 2 years. So these continuing care retirement communities struggle when the economy is subsequently not in a good position, right? Because if you think about it, when you go to your financial advisor and you're like, oh, I'm going to move into a property and it's $300,000, the average person doesn't want to do that, and I don't blame them. So my opinion is I'm not a huge fan of the entrance fee, is what I would tell you. Because again, you don't know what they're investing it in. And you can see case in point, like with the Edgemere situation, right? There are some people that were affected by it, and it was a very stressful situation for a lot of people. But the thing is, just because you have a property that says you can age in place, you can't predict the future, right? So, yes?
So speaking to that a little bit, you've talked about dealing with families who have to make multiple moves, which sounds like it is the norm, that maybe what you're choosing for now isn't necessarily what you're choosing for the long haul.
You can't predict the future. That's the problem. I tell families, we usually help people twice.
I wonder what kind of time frame you encourage people to look at. I know that you can't predict the future,
right,
and every situation is different, but are you trying to think think about this for the next 3 years? Think about this for the next 10 years? What do you?
I think again, it comes down to the situation that you're looking for. So what I tell families is if you are having to look for assisted living, but if you're looking for a 2-bedroom apartment, there are going to be wait lists for that, right? But if you're looking for a assisted living or memory care, I tell folks to contact us ideally within 3 months. Because again, if you go to a doctor, you're going to ask them, they're going to tell you from a medical perspective, but again, they don't know what you're actually going through and experiencing. And I'll tell you, like a lot of families, again, what will happen is we'll help them find a building, but then if they need that more personalized care, we'll help them find a residential care home. Because again, ultimately, what we find the number one thing is the financials. I don't care if somebody is worth $100 million, they're still going to be prudent with their financial situation. Now, again, ultimately, a care home might not be the right fit for somebody, right? So if somebody has a PEG feeding tube, right? If somebody's needing an IV. So again, everybody's situation is different, but if you're thinking about independent living, I like to tell families you should think about it maybe a year out, is what I tell families. But again, if you're going for a 3-bedroom apartment that's 2,000 square feet, you got to think well in advance, right? But more of the assisted living memory care, the care needs, you can't predict things. That's the problem. And again, if you do the homework, what happens then if there's a change, right? I mean, that's the thing is you don't know and you can't predict it. But to get back to the question of the continuing care retirement communities, I'm not a huge advocate of the entrance fee, of paying that entrance fee, because again, I would rather be able to control my money. Now, again, I don't think it benefits somebody if somebody is very well off. I really don't. But I think if somebody can qualify from an insurance policy perspective where they're not going to be asked to leave. Now, if somebody moves into a continuing care retirement community at the age of 90, that's not a good thing. I've seen families do it, but I'm like, that is just not a good investment. So again, I'm just not a huge advocate. And most of the properties here in the Metroplex are rentals, right? It's kind of, yes, you have to sign a contract, but essentially it's a month-to-month is what it is. What other questions are there? Yes?
That I really don't know the answer to. So someone comes to you, there's so many different levels of care, you give out referrals. Mm-hmm. How do you keep your finger on the pulse when there's so much change in facilities? And when you refer a daughter or a daughter-in-law for a loved one, how many referrals do you give out? What is that?
Sure. Yep, absolutely. So good question. So basically what my company is, it's kind of like an apartment locator model. So it's a free service to the consumer where the company's compensated a referral fee from the property that somebody were to move into. Now, we're not able to get compensated from anything Medicare, Medicaid, or long-term care. It's against the law.
So skilled nursing.
Correct. But we still, as Kelly knows, we still refer families to his facility because it's the right thing to do. That's why we've been ultimately successful. That's why Kelly will give my name out to friends and people that are maybe not the right fit. So we're compensated a referral fee. Now, I would say what separates us from the A Place Your Mom is that with the Place Your Mom, they only refer to places they have contracts with, which people don't know about. To me, we have contracts with, I would say probably 99% of the private pay kind of operators. But if we don't have a contract with somebody, we're still going to refer because it's the right thing to do, right? So, so the way that our process works is if you gave our name out to your neighbor, what we do is we go through a questionnaire with the family. And so we offer one of 3 ways. Number 1, over the phone. Number 2, over Zoom. Or number 3, in our office. I'm going to tell you 98% of people that I help, I never meet in person. Our business is all referral basis. I would tell you there's probably over 250 physicians that give our names out to families. Just like any business, it's all referral. It's like when David refers a family, usually we don't meet in person. They trust us.
But if I need memory care,
how do we go about? Yeah.
How many places would you give me?
Yeah. So
how do I know that you know?
That we know, yeah, vetted. Yeah, so what we do is we go through our questionnaire. It typically takes about 30 minutes. So we really get to understand who the person is, their personality, anxiety, agitation pertaining to memory care, socialization, financial, geography, dietary restrictions, care needs. It's asking a bunch of questions. Ultimately, the whole point of our service is that you don't have to go on a wild goose chase and scour the internet. So what we do is we provide 2 to 3 options to families is what our goal is. Then what we do is we teach families how to tour, right? So we teach families that they shouldn't go at 2 o'clock. We teach families to go tour the entire inside and outside of the building. But then also what we do is we develop a customized list of questions. That way the families are armed with the right list of questions. There are some placement companies that actually go and tour with families. What I've just found is I don't think it's the right thing to do, because if I go and tour with a family, I'm going to be the one who's doing the talking, a majority of the talking, or I'm going to be a fly on the wall. So that's why we develop those customized list of questions. Then what happens is the families come back to us, then we kind of discuss things, and we help them out in any way possible to advocate additional resources. If they need a moving company, a packing company, an estate sale company, anything we can do. But also we'll try to see if there's any specials available, right? We know some of the specials that are occurring. The reason why people are utilizing us is I have a team of 21 people. So I have 3 social workers on my team that have over 80 years experience in geriatrics. But if I go into a place, they're going to put on a show for us, right? They're going to put on a show for any of our teammates. We've helped close to 12,000 families since I started the company. You won't find one negative review online about us. We're very picky in who we refer to. We have families that go around us, right? They're like, oh, I chose this place. That's fine. I just don't want to be affiliated or associated with it at the current moment. So we're very picky and direct in who we're going to refer to. How do we gather it? We base it on... Yeah, so we base it on the management team. We base it on the management team. We base it if a community is acquired or sold. But we also base it on feedback. So what we do is I have a teammate of mine, her name's Jill. What she does is she checks in with families after 30 days and then after 180 days. And so the other thing is, again, we help families sometimes multiple times. So then we say confidentially, what has your experience been like? So we basically have a star rating, an internal star rating out of 5 in our system. 1 star, 2 star, 3 star, 4 star, and 5 star is what we do. And so again, I think what separates us is that we just don't want to refer families to a place for the sake of getting a referral fee. And to me, it's the ethics. I mean, that's what I never thought, again, I'd have to go through this, but I've lived my mom's legacy. And that's the same, honestly, like with in-home care providers. We're not compensated a referral fee for in-home care, but I want people to stay at home for as long as possible because it's so hard to do a move, right? We're not compensated for hospice or, estate sale. But if we can help a family out, then I know at the end of the day, you're probably going to go on the Park Cities Chatter where I get a ton of referrals from, or the Lake Highlands Moms group, and you're going to say, hey, this guy was great to work with. So to me, it's about doing the right thing. And if there's a community that is not providing the right fit and the family goes around us or wants information, I'll say, here's information. I just don't want to be affiliated because I don't want you calling us back that you're not happy. So does that answer your question? Good.
Hey, Paul, I think it's important everyone knows about the disclosure form for these licensed areas.
Yeah.
I think it's the 3641 that you can ask for when you move in, so you don't run into the situation you were describing earlier where if mom's level of care changes, this is what's going to precipitate a move.
Absolutely.
If you get to the point to where you have mechanical soft or periodite, you got to leave, or you become a 2-person transfer. You know that on the front end.
Absolutely.
So, if it's headed that direction, you don't move in, and then 3 months later, it's like, hey, surprise, you got to go.
Right. Absolutely.
You can request all of that. They have to post it.
Yep.
And you have the opportunity to look at it before you make your decision.
Absolutely. And people don't know about that you can certainly ask for that. But also, what I just find is that some of these properties know when the state's coming in, right? So that's what's kind of not cool about this industry. The state has an idea when the state's going to come in. So again, what it comes down to is try to do the homework as much as you can. We know that no place is going to be 100% perfect, right? And what a lot of people might say is, oh, well, I want a place that has a nurse 24/7. What people don't realize is that if there's an emergency, they're still going to call 911, right? I mean, if somebody breaks a hip, they're going to call 911, right, from a safety perspective. So again, you want to make sure that you do the homework. You can ask a place about the staffing ratios. When you're going to visit, make sure you see, hey, what are the staffing ratios? How often is a nurse in the building, right? How many med techs do they have each shift? You want to ask, what are the staffing ratios? 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., 2 p.m. to 10 p.m., 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. How does it differ on the weekends versus the weekdays? There's a lot of different things to think about when certainly going through this process.
How do you deal with client denial? Basically, it's all well and good to say, don't wait for a crisis. But see, I'm going to live forever, and I'm never going to get sick.
Right.
And so it almost seems like you have to wait for a crisis to get yourself moving, because there's that automatic denial kind of.
I think it's good to always be, again, nobody wants to have these conversations, but I do think it's good that you have these conversations in advance with your family, right? With your kids. I mean, the thing is listen, David, right? Make sure that you have your legal documents updated, right? Have you had those conversations? Do your kids know where they are? Do your kids have the relationship with your financial advisor, right? Now, a lot of seniors don't want to divulge their financial situation with their kids. Very common, right? Now, I would tell you scams are at an all-time high. We know this. I was scammed last summer. My 8-year-old was under a blanket for a week. I didn't know what he was doing, but I got the credit card statement at the end of the month, and he ended up charging $2,800 in Roblox, which is a game on an iPad that you just push a button. I got scammed. And so, I talk about this at all my speaking engagements, that you should put a daily dollar limit on your credit cards, but also you should put a number of transactions that can occur daily. Because if I would have done that, I wouldn't have been scammed out of $2,800. They wouldn't give the money back.
So what's his payback?
He had a rough summer. I'll just put it that way. But you know what? It's the middle kid, and the middle kid he's the toughest one, certainly. But I do think it's, again, yes, you can't plan that. But the other thing I would tell you is, I think you have to have that heart-to-heart with yourself about your main doctor that you go to, the medical, right? You might have been going to your main doctor internal medicine doctor for 30 years. You might go to a concierge doctor. You know what? That concierge doctor, you need to ask, is their specialty geriatrics, right? Now, again, I do think also you want to communicate the wishes, right, to your wife, to your kids on what you want to be done. But again, even if you've already communicated, we can't predict what the future is going to be like, right? That's the problem. So I think, again, if there's a way to have everybody on the same page, at least in your family, and if you've done as much planning, I think it only helps. Now, if it is your goal to stay in the home, then I would make sure that your home can fit a walker, can fit a wheelchair. Do the planning now, right? Have somebody come in now and make those modifications. Because then what's going to happen is if something happens and you fall, you're not going to be able to find a contractor to get it done in time, and then you're going to be in trouble. Now, you're probably going to say, well, I don't want to do that to my home now. I don't need it. It's all compromise, right? So you have to have that compromise in the relationships. I had a call with a family on Friday. It was 2 kids and their dad for their mom, and the kids are like, Dad, you need to do something. And the dad's an Army guy, he's disciplined, wants to do boom, boom, boom. And I'm like, listen, you guys have to compromise. The dad initially didn't want to get any help in the home. I said, listen, if you want your kids to be involved and in your lives, they're asking for you to have a housekeeper come in. They want you to get a caregiver because the kids are missing out with their dad going to their kids' events. And so I said to the gentleman, I'm like, Mark, you got to compromise. You got to make sure you need to do something on your end. And so then I said, listen, we're going to have a 30-day call. I want to know what's been done. That way it doesn't put the kids in a bad situation because we're kind of like an unbiased kind of third-party resource. But I don't mind being the bad guy to somebody. I really don't, because again, I want to make sure. There was a family that 3 daughters They didn't have the dad was a CPA, kept putting off the legal documents. I got involved, and the kids were so relieved because they were able to get the legal documents done, right? Like, they just kept putting it off, and they got it done. So.
Paul, I think we're not going to be in trouble.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. If there are any other questions, I'll stay up here for a little. My contact information's on the back, and I appreciate you all attending.
Thank you very much.
Yes, absolutely.